Welcome to Growth Cultivated, a Blue Bonsai podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Cassini, and today we have Jasmary Tineo, who is the founder and CEO of Hidden Roots Mental Health. And what began in 2020 as a one-person practice, which was years in the making, really took a complete career pivot from lab science, and it's now grown to a team of over 60 employees built on a foundation of person-centered care and a community mission. A single mother of three, she's a keynote speaker and a certified life coach. Jasmary's story is rooted in lived experiences, and we can't wait to hear more from you, Jasmary. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Always beautiful to be, on a platform where we can share, our story, our journey, and our testimony. So I really appreciate you guys having us.
Absolutely. We're excited to hear a little bit more background on Hidden Roots. If you could just give us a short overview.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, Hidden Roots Mental Health is an organization that was founded in 2020 in the state of Virginia. Definitely a story to how we got there prior to 2020. However, our focus is working with individuals from, low income communities, more so the Medicaid population, those that are experiencing barriers with mental health. We started with Virginia, obviously, and now we're in multiple states. And our model is pretty much the same in every state, right? We focus on the individuals that have Medicaid. One of our states is a nonprofit, so our scope can be a little bit different and bigger over there. However, those that are dealing with barriers may or may not have a diagnosis. Our objective is always to meet the individuals where they are and provide them person centered care in their own environment. Sometimes in the office environment, but mostly in their own environment. So this way we can really kind of like create a model where we can serve them in spaces that they're going to be in outside of that therapy office.
And so I imagine since it started in 2020 and the peak of COVID, that was really timely to have that online virtual care. I think now it's really mainstream and has come to be expected. But back then, that was really, more groundbreaking and really served a huge need at that time. So has that continued to really kind of be a foundation for you, more of the virtual care, even though you have these brick and mortar locations?
Yeah, so we have a mixed model as it relates to the virtual care with the type of services that we provide. It's a heavy regulated service. So because we do a lot of like the skills training and really showing individuals how to live independently with their mental health diagnosis, it's very difficult to do that in a virtual setting. So when they're doing anything like outpatient therapy or any type of assessment work, we do that virtually. However, it's more hands-on. During COVID, we did have the capacity to be able to provide virtual sessions, but that focus was more so on providing them the skills that they need, like coping mechanisms that they can utilize while they're in the environment that they're in. And then once COVID, things got better, we got reset back to that face to face interaction, which is where we can really meet individuals where they are.
Got it. And obviously, over 6 years, you have had expansive growth. How many patients are you serving at this point?
Hey, can't keep count. I mean, I know for Virginia alone, we've probably hit about 2,000.
Wow.
And it's a cycling service. So, not meaning that they're all continued in service. Our services are more short term, very intensive. Our goal is to get them in, get them stabilized so they no longer need to be in the services. So, with all the programs that we do across all states, that's really what we're doing. So, Virginia has been the flagship. And then with Texas and Ohio, those are our growing organizations. And, I would predict probably about 200 to maybe 300 individuals in those states.
And
Yes.
so over those 6 years, to grow from one practice over, 3 states, now 3 practices, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about that growth journey and, what was the moment that you realized that you were really able to scale and say, "Okay, this is something that I want to bring outside the state of Virginia," and if you could talk about that a little bit more in terms of, just the thought process and how that felt going through that moment.
So really interesting. I didn't envision it like at all. When I started Virginia, I remember, saying, "Hey, it was myself, our clinical director. I got my first administrative assistant. I remember paying her like $12 an hour, young girl. And I'm like, yeah, you're going to be my assistant. I'm going to show you how to do this reception work. And all I need you to do is intakes. And I train her to do the work. And then next thing you know, I'm like, hey, I can't wait till I get to 4 people and I'm going to stop right there. And next thing just like with the experience, just being in business and learning how to deal and manage and, kind of like focus on the regulatory stuff, but at the same time, focusing on the purpose, which is serving the individuals in the community and providing, real person centered care where we're meeting them where they are. Next thing you know, the evolvement just happened in Virginia. Not just evolvement, high turnover as well.
Hmm.
So a lot of experience came with that. And in the midst of that, I learned about myself that, hey, I'm a leader. I'm not doing this business just to run a business. There was obviously a purpose that led me here, and a lot stems from this organization, Hidden Roots Mental Health. So, with that, once I saw that I can understand the business side of it, which is the regulations, the systems, it
Hmm.
took probably about 3 years to get there. But I understood that a business cannot run without having the right systems in place. Only then I was comfortable enough to say, hey, we have something good. Let's try to explore this in another state. The first state I believe we did was Texas, actually, before we, expanded out to Ohio. And then that's just how all of that happened based off of our own experience. And we just were led into a direction. I remember going to Houston one weekend and I loved it. I absolutely loved Houston. And I said to myself, you know what? I'm impulsive. I'm gonna take the risk. That's one thing about me. I'm a risk taker. I'm a big visionary. And this is why I tell everyone on my team, like my job is to create. I'm a creative. And then everyone else's job is whatever your job description is. And all of that comes together and we're all one and we're one team in order for this to work. But I went to Texas with my COO and I said to her, I'm not leaving here without office space. So the same day that we were going to get on the flight for us to go, come back into Virginia, I literally, like, probably about an hour before getting on that flight, I went to a Regis Center, looked at an office space. I signed the contract. I said, yeah, we'll figure out the rest later. We got on the plane, came back to handle Virginia business. And next thing you know, I was submitting paperwork for the state of Texas
Wow.
to start that journey.
And so you talked about systems and knowing that you had to have these systems in place working well before you could really replicate those systems in a new location. Can you explain what some of those foundational systems were that you knew that you really needed to put boundaries on and procedures for to ensure
Yeah.
that things were working like a well-oiled machine?
Absolutely. And let's start with what you just mentioned, boundary and procedures, right? With
Mm.
boundaries, obviously, I would say that you tell a child, you're gonna learn the hard way. In business, that's just what happened with me. Like I learned the hard way. It would take, maybe a staff member or a contractor coming in and doing something, and we're like, wait, maybe, an incident may occur, or, they may have made a mistake, or we're identifying that, compliance wise, for example, we're spending a lot of time and they're not doing, or executing the way that we need them to. So, on the back end, on the administrative end, like as a leader, it's my obligation to make their job easier, but also identify where are the cracks. So, what I did was I brought my COO in. She sat in my office for about a month and she just observed. And then because I was like the owner and the one that started this is my baby, my hands were at everything. Like I was
Mhm.
running like a chicken with no head. I was answering phone calls, carrying, materials into the office with a vacuum cleaner. Like I was literally doing everything. Meanwhile, still managing my personal life, having kids 4 years apart, like different high school, middle school, starting school, like all these different things happening in my life. And she just sat down and said, you need to start delegating. I had a little bit of a team, but what I learned was I struggled with letting go. And I still struggle with that a little bit to this day,
Mhm.
right? I struggled with letting go. And once she came in, she's like, wait, we're going to start developing these systems. So honestly, everything is in my head to be able to give her the information to be able to create systems that work. However, her gift was coming in and putting this down on paper for us, developing those SOPs, me venting to her, like, hey, I can't believe this happened. Can you believe that they did this and they're doing, probably billing for something and they didn't really provide the services in that way? What do we do? That's how we came about with, okay, now we need a compliance check system and now we need SOPs. Guess what? Now we have to increase our trainings. And little by little, the development started happening with everything that we have for back office operations with the organization. So everything is still experience.
Sometimes it's hard to see that when we're so close to it,
Right.
when you do have your hands in everything, and I feel like as a lot of founders I talk to, that's one of the things that they kind of realize that they don't think of in the moment, that they're actually creating a bottleneck,
They are.
themselves for their own growth because the business can't run without them.
Right.
And so it sounds like you were able to do that pretty early on and had a really strong COO that was able to comfortably tell you that,
Yeah.
and really try and help put some guardrails up for you,
Right. Right.
both personally and professionally, but then also that always allows your team to grow and rise to the occasion for them to take more autonomy and responsibility.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that, that's really important. Is that team. A lot of times, as founders and as owners there, obviously we were given the vision. And yeah, ultimately we take a lot of the risk. I'm not going to say we take all the risk because everyone takes a risk. If they make a decision to be a part of what you're building, they too are taking a risk with whatever their journey is supposed to look like, or what that the outcome may be of them attaching themselves to your dream, right? But allowing people to lead in their space and trusting them
Mhm.
and being able to let go. Now, mistakes are going to happen regardless, whether your hands are on or off. But as the mistakes happen, identifying and being able to look, from outside of the box versus being inside of the chaos and say, hey, what can we do to make this better? How can we
Mhm.
come together to make this better? So the systems now, because it all goes right in business, I just feel like everything goes back to a system.
Yep.
Developing those systems and mastering them, which they're probably never going to be mastered because there's always evolvement. I mean, we see what's happening right now with AI, and how we're integrating that into everything that we do, right? Now, those systems that I had maybe 2 years ago, traumatically, like, and dramatically, because for some people it's trauma, for some people it's just chaos and dramatic to them. But for some people, it just makes things a whole lot easier. But these systems are always going to change.
Yeah, and they need to adapt because we're adapting as humans, we're adapting technologically, we're
Right,
adapting emotionally. I
right,
mean, all of that is a never-ending, cycle of change.
right,
And because you were able, to get these systems, you touched on the AI and how that's really starting to change the business. Can you tell us a little bit about how maybe that has changed your systems and what are some of the areas that you and your team have focused on really embracing it, and also maybe some places where you're like, okay, we're not ready for that. That's
right.
aspirational and maybe, we'll get there.
Yeah.
But yes, I'd love to know how you're utilizing the AI technology.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we do have a team. Like, for example, with my marketing team, they may go ahead and take, all of my pictures and all of our content from like a team build event, and then I'll send it over. And then now they're scheduling our posts and they're automatically being posted on social media.
Mm,
So systems are now like automated. And now, we can go into AI and have AI do this research for us like, hey, what's the happenings for the next 90 days and what should our focus be? And even though we may have that vision, like for example, I may say, like, as a founder, like, hey, I feel like it's time for us to, focus more on women's mental health. I can take that prompt or that vision that I may have and drop it into some AI system, and give them my prompt and see, hey, what do you have for me? Are there any events and happenings over here right now in the state of Virginia that I can attach myself to? And how do I get that information? And, that's
yes.
one way that we utilize it. Another way is, with our compliance trackers, right?
Hmm.
Dropping that whole spreadsheet into AI to just give me, analytically, where do we stand as it reports to our percentage with, charts being in the green versus them being in the red. And instead of me actually paying someone, to sit behind a computer for like 8 hours, AI can do this for me within a matter of seconds
Yep.
sometimes. So basically, finding ways that we can kind of like amplify our systems, never take away from them, but amplify them with AI right
Absolutely.
now. That's kind of like how we've been utilizing, but clinically, that's where we're a little bit like, okay, we may not be able to use AI too much for this because what we do is regulated.
Of
And
course.
everyone, clinicians, LPCs, LCSWs, every state has their own acronyms. So, with that, it's not ethical to utilize AI because we
Yep.
are still dealing with human lives, right? And
Yep.
you do have a governing body that oversees everything that you do.
HIPAA.
And it is, your obligation because you're signing off on this in the code of ethics. There are ethics that we have to follow, and dropping everything into AI is not ethical because AI
Correct.
is not dealing with that human?
Correct. Yeah,
Yes.
and I think that that's, what I'm hearing a lot from those in the health and wellness space is, independently, there's a lot of, positive, from AI and automations, but
Right.
it's really from more of the mass, patient
Right.
input that, things really have to be, carefully set up and making
Right.
sure that you have the systems, in the cloud security to ensure that all of those things are taken care of. So, but yeah, it sounds like you guys are embracing it in all the right
Mhm.
places. So, what are some of the big, I guess, challenges and maybe milestones that you've had along the way that you can impart that knowledge on others to help them learn from your own personal and professional journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we spoke a little bit about the challenge of letting go. That's always been a huge challenge, and we already touched on that. So, outside of the challenge of letting go, just really challenging when you're dealing with yourself in business, because not only, are you in business and you have the responsibility to lead and to build and to provide security, but really getting to a place where you're centering yourself and understanding who you are and how you show up. A lot of times, we have these, starter businesses, successful businesses, and we don't take the time to really like reflect on how am I showing up to my staff, right? Like
Right.
how are maybe the behaviors and the patterns that I have affecting, how what their outcome may be on their day to day for us to kind of like get to like that end goal. So I think that's been a challenge for me, still is, to this day, transparently and realistically speaking. I'm the visionary. I'm the one that's like, oh, we got to do this. We got to do this. No, this doesn't work. I need this done right away. And, that can be a stressor for the individuals that are under you because sometimes they may not be able to operate at that capacity, right?
Mhm.
So, and it can be a frustration for me as a founder and a CEO because my expectation is we just have to get it done.
Mhm.
So sometimes, it is a challenge when, you're dealing with yourself and, you know, uh, really trying to understand like, how do I change this behavior when, my automatic response is, I need to get it done. So, some of the things that I've done is always having kind of like that confidant. So that's going to hold you accountable and keep it real with you and let when you are not okay, when you are not doing things the right way and how you're showing up may be affecting, the outcome of what you're trying to do within the organization, within maybe a particular role, within, trying to build one of your leaders up or whatever it is. So that's one of the things, doing things to ground myself, like making sure that I'm participating in therapy, making sure that I am taking my me time. So I can
Mhm.
disconnect even from the business where my phone goes on airplane mode and, I'm sorry, but I'm not available. I'm not answering that phone call at 6 o'clock a.m. So now I can give myself the time so I can have the capacity to show up for you because you're going to need me. And then I can do that with a grounded mind.
I think you hit it on the head. You can't wear all the different hats. And if
No.
you're not taking care of yourself, it's so hard to be there and show up for your team in a way that they need you. And so can you explain a little bit about your background and just some of your own education and how that's helped build the foundation for not just yourself personally, but also professionally.
Absolutely. So, outside of the education, that's actually a requirement, right? In order for us to be well equipped and have the tools to work in the field. So, I do have my degree, in science and in psychology. And, I am a certified life coach, and all that is great because it gave me the tools. Now I can say, hey, yeah, I do have these credentials in order for me to do what I have to do, but mostly it's lived experience. Those are the real things that I have. I've always been the one that people would go to get advice from. I've always been the one, that kind of like was the daydreamer, the quiet one that had like the vision, and nobody knew what she was thinking. They thought I wasn't going to even speak. So for them to see me, but you're a life coach and you're out here speaking, like we can't believe that. Like those that know me since childhood growing up, those lived experience, like having a mom that struggled with bipolar disorder. Not living, from the Latino community where, that was always, hidden under the carpet. The stigma was always there. There's so many different experiences that got me to the place where, yeah, I went to school, I became a certified life coach. I went to school and got my degree in psychology and in science, and but those things is not what got me to this place. If that makes sense. So, without outside of that, prior to this, I didn't know that this is the field that I was going to be in. I was a whole lab tech in the state of New York. I went to school to study immunology, prior to this because I didn't know what mental health was.
Mm.
So when, we think about like, hey, like, your credentials and your story and who you are and what got you here, this is just a journey that chose me. Because before I came out in this beautiful world, you know, my mom struggled with bipolar disorder. And she was undiagnosed for pretty much her whole life up until
Mm.
I was 25 years old. She raised three children, low income housing, just dealing with a mental illness and having episodes. And nobody knew really what she was struggling with up until I had a crisis situation with her and I had to respond. I
Mm.
was the bad guy for a period of time in my family. And only then I was exposed to, hey, this is her diagnosis and this is what she's dealing with. So now, even in the midst of that, I didn't have the opportunity or the education to understand like what does bipolar mean. I was like, because she's bipolar. Okay, what that's affecting me. Let me get out of here because this is not working for me. Like it was chaos. Chaos is what developed me. Chaos. I went and got the credentials, of course, because now I know better. You do better. But the chaos and the stories and the testimonies of everything that I've been through, having a parent that struggled with a disorder is what led me to this journey.
Well, and obviously that experience helps you really have a empathy for your patients that probably is very unique, as well as allows your patients to identify with you and really just have a different level of compassion, probably because of just that emotional understanding of what they potentially could be going through in their unique situation.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's what they say. A lot of individuals that kind of like get into this helping field, it's because they've had some type of a lived experience. So I think that, it definitely helps the core
Mhm.
of, what our purpose is, right? What we're, where we're trying to get to, which is really providing individuals that person centered care. That person centeredness means that I see you. This is not about me.
Mhm.
Even though I've had experiences, I can empathize with those experiences because I've been through a lot. Like I was just sitting down yesterday with my, COO, and we were, having a conversation, and I shared some of the stories, and I said, I could probably write about 5 or 6 different books, different genres as well with those books, just
Yeah.
because of all the experiences that I've had, but that helps. So whatever, whether you're here for a short season, for a long season, to provide good service, or you need to work on yourself and figure out a way to show up better, our goal with individuals that come in and become a part of our journey is that you leave with something. You leave with something for yourself.
That's fantastic. And
Yes.
obviously, you you've built that strong culture, in a short amount of time. And
Yeah.
again, the fact that you have 60 plus employees really is a testament to that. As we wrap up, I'd love to know what some of your plans are for the future for yourself and Hidden Roots. And obviously, as that founder and visionary, you're always, thinking ahead to the next thing. Would you like to share with us some of those ideas and dreams that you have and you're aspiring to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the organization, I know that this was a gift. In order for me to be able to create opportunity for others, whether it be the clients or the individuals that work for the organization. So, of course, I'm looking at more expansion projects, going into other states. However, back to the systems, my goal is to identify other teams to come in, right now I would say I'm mid-size, mid-level company, right? To maybe bring in more advisors to help us amplify everything that we've done so far. The growth is great. However, there's a lot of back office stuff that you need to be able to manage in order for you to be able to substantiate that growth and to continue to grow. I'm really big on, hey, stop everything that we're doing right now and let's focus on getting this right before we continue to move forward.
Mm.
So one of the goals is bringing those, big time, high credentialed advisors into what we already have to help amplify our systems a little bit more. And then my skill set, being fully transparent is not in finance. So identifying really good financial advisors as it relates to the growth that we're experiencing. We are in 3 different states right now. So that means that we are billing all these different insurance companies. We have people that work remotely from other states. So we have, all these different labor laws that we need to
Mhm.
kind of like, abide by. So, I do have a good legal team. I do have, individuals that work state specific, but I just feel like now we're getting to a different level. So, now I'm in a season of bringing in a higher level team to kind of like operate with those functions because I'm looking to expand to other states in the future. Yes.
Congratulations. It,
Yes.
it's
Thank
it's
you.
it's sounds like it's been a whirlwind, but really, really positive growth that has taken you by surprise in all the
Yes.
right ways.
Oh my gosh.
And I really just appreciate the personal attention that you've given to yourself and the
Right.
boundaries you've set to be able to really allow this type of growth,
Yeah.
because burnout is a real thing.
It is.
And you being in the mental health space, definitely know that. So yes, continue upward and beyond. And we really appreciate you being on the show
Yeah.
today, Jasmary.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you guys. And we're going to keep on pushing. That's all we can do. Show up and show out.
Yes, I
Yes.
love it. I love it. Well, thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard today, please don't forget to subscribe and like the show. And until then, keep cultivating smarter growth. Thank
Let's
you.
do it. Thank you.